My 6-year-old son was on life support after a crash when my wife texted, "Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow." I said, "I can't. I'm in the hospital with my son fighting for his life." "Why aren't you here?" My wife said, "My niece's party matters more than your drama." I froze at her cruelty, then I asked for a DNA. Doctor said, "Your wife." Look, I'm not one of those guys who believes in signs from the universe or karma or whatever spiritual mumbo-jumbo people post about on Instagram between their avocado toast pictures. But if I'm being totally honest here, the sound of metal crunching into metal is something that'll haunt you forever, like that one embarrassing thing you said in 7th grade that randomly pops into your head at 3 in the morning. One second, my kid Leo was belting out Taylor Swift lyrics in the back seat, and I mean absolutely butchering them. Bless his heart. And the next second, some genius in an SUV decided that red lights were more like suggestions than actual traffic laws. You know, the kind of driver who probably texts and drives while eating a burrito and doing their taxes simultaneously. The impact hit us on the passenger side, right where physics and terrible life choices collide, and suddenly the whole world went sideways in the most literal sense possible. When I finally pried my eyes open, which took what felt like 3 business days, but was probably more like 30 seconds, the first thing that hit me wasn't the pain or the shock, or even the realization that my car now looked like an accordion some drunk giant had stepped on. Nope, it was the smell. Smoke and fear, mixed together in this nauseating cocktail that made my stomach flip like a gymnast on Red Bull. There's something about that particular combination of burning rubber, deployed airbags, and pure adrenaline-fueled terror that just sears itself into your brain forever. I'm pretty sure they could bottle that scent and use it for torture because it's that effective at making you question every life decision that led you to that exact moment. My hands were shaking, like full-on earthquake-level trembling, as I twisted around to check on Leo. The back seat looked like a war zone, all twisted metal and broken glass catching the afternoon sunlight in ways that would have been beautiful if they weren't absolutely horrifying. And there was my boy, my 7-year-old kid who just that morning had argued with me about whether dinosaurs could technically be considered dragons, slumped over in his car seat with blood trickling down from somewhere I couldn't immediately identify. His eyes were closed, and for one gut-wrenching second, the longest second of my entire pathetic life, I thought I'd lost him right there. But then I saw his chest moving, shallow little breaths that were the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. Better than any sunrise or wedding day or championship game in human history. The paramedics arrived in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye, which is apparently what happens when your brain goes into full-blown panic mode and time becomes this weird, stretchy concept that doesn't follow normal rules anymore. They extracted Leo with the kind of careful precision that made me simultaneously grateful and terrified, because you only move that carefully when things are really, really bad. One of them, this guy with kind eyes and a mustache that belonged in a 70s cop show, kept talking to me in that calm, measured voice they teach you in paramedic school, the one that's supposed to keep people from completely losing their minds. "Your son's stable," he kept saying, which in medical speak apparently means not dead yet, but definitely not good either. Hours later, and I'm talking the kind of hours where you lose all concept of whether it's day or night or maybe Tuesday. I found myself in the ICU staring at what used to be my son, but now looked more like some kind of science experiment gone wrong. Leo was absolutely covered in wires and tubes, so many that I couldn't figure out where the medical equipment ended and my actual kid began. There were machines beeping and whirring and doing whatever the hell machines do when they're keeping someone alive. Each sound a reminder that my boy's life was currently being outsourced to technology. His face was pale, way too pale, like someone had drained all the color out and replaced it with chalk, and there were bruises forming that made my stomach twist into knots that would have impressed a Boy Scout troop leader. I sat in one of those spectacularly uncomfortable hospital chairs that are apparently designed by people who hate the human spine, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid being forced to go to church by my grandmother. I prayed. And I'm not talking about those casual, "please let me find a parking spot" prayers either. This was full-on, desperate, bargaining with whatever higher power might be listening kind of praying. The kind where you promise to be a better person, donate to charity, stop cutting people off in traffic, whatever it takes. I would have promised to become a vegan who does CrossFit and won't shut up about either if it meant Leo would be okay. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my leg like the universe's worst timing imaginable. I almost ignored it. I mean, what could possibly be important enough to interrupt watching your kid fight for his life? But something made me pull it out anyway. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was that tiny, stupid part of my brain that thought maybe, just maybe, it was good news from a doctor or a concerned family member or literally anyone with a functioning heart. It was my wife, Camille. Finally, I thought. Finally, she's checking in, asking where we are, probably freaking out because she hadn't heard from us. I opened the text message, and you know what it said? You know what this woman, the mother of the child currently hooked up to more machines than a Radio Shack, chose to communicate to me in this moment? Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow. I stared at those words for a solid minute, maybe longer, reading them over and over again like maybe I'd misunderstood, like maybe autocorrect had gotten really aggressive and changed, oh my God, is Leo okay? Into a request for baked goods. But nope, there it was, crystal clear in that irritating font she used on her phone. Cupcakes. For a party. Tomorrow. As if the universe hadn't just tried to rearrange my son's internal organs into a modern art installation. My fingers were still shaking as I typed back, trying to keep my response somewhere between concerned husband and guy about to lose his absolute mind. I wrote, Camille, I'm in the hospital. Leo's on life support. Where are you? I even proofread it twice to make sure I wasn't being unclear, because apparently, I thought the problem might be my communication skills rather than the fact that my wife was requesting cupcakes during a family crisis. Her response came back faster than a boomerang covered in red flags. My niece's party matters more than your drama. Drama. She called this drama. Like I was being some kind of attention-seeking diva because my kid was potentially dying. Like the tubes breathing for him and the monitors tracking his heartbeat and the doctors conferring in serious whispers outside his room were all just props in my elaborate performance piece about being inconvenienced. Drama. Like I'd stubbed my toe, or gotten a parking ticket, or found out they discontinued my favorite cereal. Drama, as if the worst moment of my entire life was somehow equivalent to missing a hair appointment or getting decaf instead of regular. I sat there in that terrible chair, in that too-bright hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams, staring at that single word on my phone screen. And something inside me, something that had probably been cracking for months, or maybe even years, just completely shattered, and then immediately reassembled itself into something different. Something harder. Something done with whatever this marriage had become. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It rebooted. Like someone had forced a factory reset on my entire emotional operating system, wiping out all the excuses I'd been making, all the times I'd justified her behavior, all the moments I'd convinced myself that this was just how marriage worked sometimes. Nope. This wasn't normal. This wasn't acceptable. This wasn't drama. This was my wake-up call, delivered via text message and served with a side of cupcake requests, and I was finally ready to answer it. So here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You think you've landed, you think the ground can't possibly get any lower, and then someone hands you a shovel and says, keep digging, buddy. That's exactly what happened when I decided to call Camille, because apparently reading her psychotic text message wasn't enough punishment for one day. I needed to hear her voice, needed to confirm that yes, my wife was actually this detached from reality, that this wasn't some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by hospital coffee and existential dread. I pressed her contact, which I noticed was still labeled Cam Red Heart, because apparently past me was an optimistic idiot, and listened to it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, and then straight to voicemail. Her voicemail, by the way, was one of those chirpy recordings where she sounded like a step-forward wife on uppers. Hi. You've reached Camille. I'm probably doing something fabulous right now, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when I'm done being amazing. I wanted to throw my phone through the ICU window, but hospitals frown upon that kind of thing, plus I'm pretty sure my insurance wouldn't cover emotional breakdown-related property damage. I didn't leave a message because what was I supposed to say? Hey honey, just calling from our son's deathbed. Wondering if you could spare 5 minutes from being fabulous to pretend you care about your child. Yeah, that would have gone over great. Instead, I sat there stewing in my own frustration, watching Leo's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision thanks to the ventilator, wondering how I'd ended up married to someone who apparently had the emotional range of a parking meter. That's when my phone buzzed again, and for one brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe Camille had seen my missed call and was calling back with an apology, maybe even some concern. But no, the universe wasn't done kicking me while I was down. It was a text from Trisha, Camille's sister, who had apparently been designated as the family spokesperson for Team Insanity. Stop being dramatic. Kids get hurt all the time. I read that message 3 times, each read making me progressively more convinced that I'd accidentally married into a family of sociopaths who'd just been really good at hiding it during the dating phase. Kids get hurt all the time. Yeah, Trisha, kids also scrape their knees and get paper cuts and fall off swings. But most of them don't end up in the ICU looking like they're auditioning for a medical drama. There's a pretty significant difference between a boo-boo that requires a Band-Aid and whatever the hell this situation was. But apparently, nuance wasn't Trisha's strong suit. I should mention that Trisha runs an orphanage, which always seemed like such a noble thing until right about now when I was starting to wonder if she just liked being around people who couldn't talk back or call her out on her garbage takes. She'd always given me weird vibes. The kind of person who smiles too much and hugs too long and says things like, everything happens for a reason, when objectively terrible things happen. You know the type. The ones who think positive thinking can cure cancer and that essential oils are a valid substitute for actual medical care. But wait, the family circus wasn't done performing yet. Because apparently, they had a group chat, a whole dedicated digital space for coordinating their collective delusion, and Camille's dad decided it was his turn to chime in with some real wisdom. His text popped up like a little grenade of condescension. Don't bring your negative energy to our family events. Negative energy. Negative energy. My son was hooked up to machines that were literally keeping him alive, and I was being accused of having bad vibes like I was Hersheying the mellow at some kind of wellness retreat. What was I supposed to do? Show up to little Madison's birthday party with jazz hands and a smile while my kid was potentially dying? Hey everyone, sorry I'm late. Just came from the hospital where Leo might not make it. But let's party, am I right? Who wants cake? I stared at that group chat, which I now noticed was called the Harrison Family Fun Times, with way too many emoji, and watched as more messages started flooding in. Camille's mom. We raised you better than to be so selfish. Camille's brother. Always making everything about you. And then Camille herself, joining the pile-on like this was some kind of team sport. See? Everyone agrees you're overreacting. Overreacting. That word kept coming up like a bad penny or a herpes outbreak. According to these people, having a normal human emotional response to my child being in critical condition was overreacting. Wanting my wife to be at the hospital was overreacting. Expecting literally any shred of empathy or support was apparently me being a drama queen who needed to check myself before I wrecked their precious family event schedule. I sat there in that hospital room, with the machines beeping their steady rhythm and the fluorescent lights humming their annoying tune, and I had what you might call an epiphany. Or maybe it was just my brain finally catching up to what my gut had been trying to tell me for years. This wasn't a family I'd married into. This was a cult. A full-blown, Kool-Aid drinking, matching sweater wearing, reality-denying cult that just happened to have better PR than your typical doomsday group. Think about it. They had their own private language of gaslighting, their own hierarchy with Camille's parents at the top dispensing wisdom like some kind of dysfunctional Mount Olympus, and their own set of rules that made no sense to anyone outside their bubble. They operated on a totally different moral plane where cupcakes actually were more important than human life, where appearances mattered more than actual emergencies, and where anyone who dared to prioritize something other than their social calendar was immediately branded as the problem. The worst part? I'd been drinking their Kool-Aid for years. I'd convinced myself that this was just how some families operated, that maybe I was too sensitive, that perhaps I needed to be more understanding of their different communication style. Different communication style. That's what I'd been calling it when Camille would dismiss my feelings or when her family would gang up on me during holidays. I'd made excuses, bent over backward, contorted myself into shapes that would impress a yoga instructor, all to fit into their warped version of what family should look like. But sitting there, watching my son fight for his life while his own mother couldn't be bothered to even pretend to care, something clicked. This wasn't me being too sensitive. This wasn't me overreacting or being dramatic or bringing negative energy. This was them being fundamentally broken in ways that no amount of couples therapy or family counseling could fix. You can't reason someone into having empathy. You can't logic someone into caring about their own child. And you definitely can't fix people who think birthday parties are more important than ICU visits. I looked down at my phone, at that group chat full of people who shared DNA with my wife, but apparently not a single functioning moral compass between them, and I realized something else. I was done. Not just frustrated or angry or hurt, though I was definitely all of those things, but genuinely, completely done. Done making excuses for them. Done trying to translate their cruelty into something more palatable. Done pretending that this was somehow normal or acceptable or fixable. The thing about cults is that they only have power over you as long as you believe in their reality. The second you step outside and see them for what they really are, a bunch of people who've collectively agreed to a completely insane worldview, they lose that power. And standing there in that hospital room, or technically sitting in that torture device they called a chair, I finally stepped outside. I saw them clearly for the first time. A family so obsessed with maintaining their perfect image and their perfect little events that they'd sacrificed basic human decency at the altar of social obligation. Camille's family wasn't just lacking empathy, they were actively hostile to it. They'd created this ecosystem where caring too much was a weakness, where emotional honesty was treated like a disease, and where anyone who refused to play along with their collective delusion was immediately ostracized. And I'd been so busy trying to be a good husband, trying to keep the peace, trying to make it work, that I'd missed the obvious truth. You can't make it work with people who think you're the problem for having normal human feelings. I turned off my phone, didn't just silence it, but actually powered it down because I couldn't stand to see another message from the Harrison family Fun Times chat. The sudden silence was almost jarring after hours of constant buzzing and beeping, but it felt good. Necessary, even. Like I was finally allowed to just exist in this moment, in this terrible situation, without having to justify my emotions to people who wouldn't understand them anyway. Leo's hand was small and cold in mine, his fingers barely moving, but still there, still real, still fighting. And that's when it really hit me. This kid, this amazing little boy who sang Taylor Swift off-key and asked impossible questions about dinosaurs and dragons, he deserved better than a family that treated his life like an inconvenience. He deserved a father who would fight for him, protect him, choose him over and over again, even when, especially when, everyone else was too busy worrying about cupcakes and negative energy and maintaining their delusional little bubble. The Harrison family could keep their matching sweaters and their group chat and their warped priorities. I had more important things to worry about, like making sure my son survived this nightmare and figuring out what the hell I was going to do about the fact that I'd apparently married into the Manson family's more socially acceptable cousins. It took Camille exactly 47 hours to grace us with her presence at the hospital. And yes, I was counting because when your wife goes to you during your child's medical crisis, you tend to keep track of these things. 47 hours. That's 2 full days, minus an hour. That's enough time to binge watch an entire Netflix series, drive to Canada and back, or apparently, get a full spa treatment and wardrobe consultation before bothering to check on your dying kid. When she finally walked into the ICU, and I mean walked, not rushed or ran or showed any sense of urgency whatsoever, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep and too much hospital coffee. Because the woman who entered that room looked like she'd just stepped off a Milan runway during Fashion Week, not like someone whose son had been fighting for his life while hooked up to more tubes than a science lab. She was wearing this cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than the ambulance ride, heels so high they could double as weapons, and enough jewelry to fund a small country's GDP. Her makeup was absolutely flawless. We're talking professionally done, Instagram filter in real life level perfection, and her hair had that kind of bounce you only get from a salon that charges by the strand. But here's the kicker, the thing that really sent me into the stratosphere, her perfume. This woman had doused herself in so much perfume that I could smell her from the hallway, like she'd bathed in a vat of whatever fancy French nonsense cost $300 an ounce. The scent hit me like a chemical weapon, so strong that I watched one of the nurses actually wrinkle her nose and take a step back. In an ICU, where there are people with compromised immune systems and breathing problems, My wife had turned herself into a walking biohazard because apparently looking good was more important than, I don't know, basic hospital etiquette or human decency. She clip-clopped over to Leo's bedside in those ridiculous heels, the sound echoing through the quiet ICU like gunshots, and I watched her face as she looked at our son. You know what expression she had? Mild inconvenience. The same look you'd give a long line at Starbucks or traffic on the highway. Not horror, not concern, not even basic human empathy. Just this slightly annoyed expression like Leo's current state of almost dead was somehow personally offensive to her aesthetic. Her nails, and I noticed this immediately because they were practically glowing, were freshly manicured, some kind of elaborate design with tiny crystals or whatever it is that costs $100 at those fancy nail places. They were perfect, absolutely perfect, which meant that at some point in the last 47 hours, while I'd been surviving on vending machine food and praying to every deity I could think of, Camille had been sitting in a nail salon picking out designs and chatting with her manicurist about whatever the hell people talk about when they're getting their nails done instead of visiting their hospitalized child. I was about to say something. I had a whole speech prepared in my head involving creative uses of medical terminology and some words my mother would have washed my mouth out with soap for using. When Camille opened her mouth first, "Did you bring the cupcakes?" I'm not kidding. Those were her first words. Not, "How's Leo doing?" Or, "Oh my God, is he okay?" Or even a simple, "I'm sorry I'm late." Nope. This woman's opening line, her grand entrance statement after 47 hours of radio silence, was about baked goods for a party that, in case anyone was keeping score, was now definitely over. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to crack a smile and say "just kidding," or show literally any sign that she was a real human being with functioning emotions. But she just stood there, waiting for my answer like this was a completely normal question to ask in an ICU while your kid is on life support. "Camille," I said slowly, carefully, like I was explaining advanced physics to a toddler, "our son is on life support." She sighed. Actually sighed. The kind of dramatic, put-upon sigh that teenagers give their parents when asked to clean their rooms. Her perfectly glossed lips pursed together in annoyance, and she shifted her weight from one designer heel to the other like I was the one being unreasonable here. "You always overreact," she said, waving one of those crystal-encrusted nails dismissively at Leo's prone form like he was a minor props malfunction in her life story. "Madison's party is important. She deserves a normal day. Let me break down what just happened here, because I feel like we need to really appreciate the absolute insanity of this moment. My wife, the woman I'd married, the woman who'd supposedly given birth to the child currently fighting for his life 10 feet away from us, had just told me that I was overreacting about our son being in critical condition because her niece's birthday party was important. Madison, a kid who had presumably had 6 or 7 previous birthdays and would hopefully have many more, deserved a normal day more than Leo deserved to, I don't know, survive? I blinked at her, genuinely unsure if I was dealing with a human being or some kind of AI that had malfunctioned spectacularly. Like maybe someone had programmed a robot to be a wife and mother but forgot to install the empathy software. Or maybe the compassion chip had gotten corrupted by too many Instagram filters and reality TV shows. Because surely, an actual human woman who'd carried a child for 9 months and raised him for 7 years couldn't stand in an ICU and prioritize a birthday party over her son's life. That couldn't be real. That had to be some kind of glitch in the matrix. But there she stood, all designer clothes and expensive perfume and perfect makeup, looking at me like I was the crazy one for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, our dying kid was slightly more important than cupcakes. And something inside me snapped. Not in the explosive, dramatic way you see in movies where people start yelling and throwing things. No, this was quieter, colder, like a door closing and locking and then having the key thrown into the ocean. I straightened up from the uncomfortable chair I'd been living in for the past 2 days, and I looked her directly in her perfectly made-up eyes, and I said the words that had been building in my brain since the moment I got her text about cupcakes. Maybe I should get a DNA test. Something tells me I'm surrounded by lies. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have any real evidence at that point. No smoking gun, no concrete proof, Just a gut feeling that had been growing stronger with every passing hour of her absence, every insane text message from her family, every moment of her complete and total lack of maternal instinct. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, felt off, felt like there were puzzle pieces that didn't fit together the way they should. And in that moment, standing in that ICU with my son hooked up to machines and my wife looking annoyed that I was ruining her aesthetics, I decided to throw that suspicion out there like a grenade and see what happened. Her face twitched. Just for a second, maybe half a second, really, but I saw it. I'd been married to this woman for 8 years, and I knew her tells. That tiny little crack in her perfect makeup commercial expression, that microscopic moment where her eyes went wide and her jaw tensed, and something that looked suspiciously like panic flashed across her features before she smoothed it all back into her usual mask of bored superiority. In that fraction of a second, in that tiny crack in her armor, I saw the truth. I didn't know what the truth was yet, didn't know the details or the specifics or the full extent of whatever she'd been hiding, but I knew it was there. I knew I'd hit something, struck a nerve, found the weak spot in whatever elaborate lie she'd been maintaining. It was like watching someone play poker and seeing them react to a card they didn't want anyone to know they had. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that. Her face rearranged itself back into that annoyed expression, and she rolled her eyes like I'd just suggested something ridiculous, like aliens or Bigfoot or the idea that she might actually care about her son. You're being paranoid, she said, but her voice had changed. It was tighter now, more controlled, like she was actively monitoring every word. The stress is making you crazy. You need sleep. But it was too late. I'd seen it. That moment of truth, that flash of panic, that confirmation that whatever instinct had been nagging at me was right. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and I'd been too busy being a devoted husband and father to notice it. Too busy making excuses for her behavior, rationalizing her coldness, convincing myself that this was just how she showed love, or that maybe I was expecting too much. The machines around Leo kept beeping their steady rhythm, completely indifferent to the drama unfolding in front of them. The nurses outside were doing their rounds, checking charts, living their normal lives while mine was apparently imploding in slow motion. And Camille stood there in her designer dress and ridiculous heels, her perfect nails and flawless makeup, looking at me like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd brought chaos into her carefully curated life. I think you should go, I said quietly, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the fact that my heart was racing and my hands were shaking, and every instinct in my body was screaming that something was catastrophically wrong with my entire life. She looked offended, like I'd just suggested she was anything less than perfect. Excuse me. Go back to your family, I said, putting just enough emphasis on your to make it clear that I no longer considered them mine. Go explain to Madison why there are no cupcakes. I'm sure that's a much bigger crisis than anything happening here. For a moment, I thought she might actually argue, might actually try to defend herself or her insane priorities or her complete lack of basic human emotions. But instead, she just huffed, adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder, and turned on those stupidly expensive heels. You'll regret this attitude, she said over her shoulder as she walked away, her perfume leaving a toxic trail in her wake. I watched her go, watched her walk out of the ICU like she was exiting a bad restaurant instead of abandoning her son, and I thought, no, Camille, the only thing I regret is not getting that DNA test years ago, because something was definitely wrong here, and I was going to find out exactly what. You know what's funny about suspicion? Once it gets into your head, it's like a splinter that keeps working its way deeper under your skin until you can't ignore it anymore, no matter how much you try to convince yourself it's nothing. That tiny moment of panic on Camille's face, that microscopic crack in her perfect facade, it burrowed into my brain and set up permanent residence there, throwing parties at 3 in the morning when I should have been sleeping and generally making it impossible to think about anything else. I have this friend, Tony, who works at a private lab doing DNA testing and paternity stuff. We went to college together, and he's one of those guys who's simultaneously brilliant and completely socially awkward. The kind of person who can explain genetic markers in excruciating detail, but can't figure out how to talk to women without breaking into a nervous sweat. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through occasional beers and fantasy football leagues, and he owed me a favor from when I helped him move last year. and didn't complain about his collection of vintage Star Wars action figures that took up approximately 7,000 boxes. I called him from the hospital cafeteria because apparently that's where I lived now. Surviving on questionable coffee and sandwiches that tasted like cardboard had a disappointing one-night stand with mayonnaise. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, and I could hear the sounds of his lab in the background, all beeping machines and technical whatever. "Tony," I said, not bothering with pleasantries because I was way past the point of small talk. "I need a DNA test. Actually, I need several DNA tests. And I need them done quietly, quickly, and I need you to not ask me why." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence that stretches just long enough to be uncomfortable but not long enough to be weird. Tony was good at reading between the lines. Came with the territory of being the guy who spent his days confirming or destroying people's lives with science. "How quickly are we talking?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice even though he was trying to keep it professional. "Yesterday would be great, but I'll settle for as soon as humanly possible," I said, staring at my reflection in the cafeteria window and barely recognizing the exhausted, hollow-eyed guy staring back. "I need to test me, my wife Camille, and my son Leo. Full paternity workup, whatever you can give me." Tony didn't ask questions, bless him. He just said, "Bring me samples tomorrow. I'll put a rush on it." Getting the samples was easier than I expected, probably because the universe decided to throw me a bone after kicking me repeatedly in the teeth for the past week. Leo's medical team had already drawn blood for their tests, and I managed to sweet-talk one of the nurses. This awesome lady named Patricia, who'd been sneaking me decent coffee and sympathy in equal measures, into letting me have a small sample for additional testing. For myself, I just swabbed my cheek in the hospital bathroom like some kind of bargain basement spy, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. Camille's sample was trickier, but she'd left her hairbrush at the house, because of course she had multiple hairbrushes in multiple locations like some kind of hair care doomsday prepper, and I grabbed it along with her toothbrush when I went home to shower and change clothes for the first time in 3 days. I felt like a criminal, sneaking around my own house collecting DNA evidence from my own wife, but that feeling was rapidly being replaced by a grim determination to know the truth, whatever it was. I dropped everything off at Tony's lab the next morning, handed him a Ziploc bag full of what probably looked like the world's weirdest collection of random items, and he just nodded and told me he'd call me in a few days. A few days. That's how long I had to wait to find out if my entire life was built on lies, if my marriage was a sham, if my son was actually my son. Just a few days of excruciating limbo while I pretended everything was fine and sat in that ICU watching Leo slowly, thankfully, start to improve. The call came 4 days later. I was in the middle of arguing with Camille's mother on the phone. She'd called to yell at me for abandoning family obligations, which apparently meant I should have been at some cousin's baby shower instead of at the hospital, when my phone buzzed with Tony's number. I hung up on Mrs. Harrison mid-sentence, which felt better than it probably should have, and answered Tony's call. "Buddy," Tony said, and I immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong because Tony never called me buddy unless he was about to deliver bad news. I don't even know how to explain this. My stomach dropped so fast it probably left a crater in the hospital floor. I sat down on the nearest chair, one of those plastic waiting room torture devices, and gripped my phone so hard I was surprised it didn't crack. "Just tell me," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Is Leo mine?" There was another one of those pauses, the kind that lasts a geological epoch but is probably only a few seconds in real time. Then Tony said, "Leo isn't your son." The world tilted sideways. Actually tilted, like someone had picked up reality and shaken it like a snow globe. I heard the words, understood them individually, but together they made no sense. Leo wasn't my son. The kid I'd raised for 7 years, taught to ride a bike, read bedtime stories to, stayed up all night with when he was sick. The kid who called me dad and had my sense of humor and my stubborn streak. That kid wasn't biologically mine. Wait. I managed to choke out, because my brain was short-circuiting and I needed clarification, needed to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding some crucial detail. "Not mine. Not yours," Tony confirmed, and I could hear the sympathy in his voice, the kind of pity you give someone whose life you're watching implode in real time. But then he said something that made absolutely zero sense. Something that took the already insane situation and cranked it up to absolutely deranged levels. And not Camille's either. I actually laughed. Like, genuinely laughed out loud. A sound that was probably more hysteria than humor, but still technically qualified as laughter. A nurse walking by gave me a concerned look, probably wondering if I'd finally snapped after days of hospital living and was about to need my own medical intervention. Come again, I said, because surely I'd misheard. Surely Tony hadn't just told me that the child my wife supposedly gave birth to wasn't biologically hers. That wasn't possible. I'd been there for the pregnancy, seen her belly grow, been in the delivery room when she supposedly pushed him out. You can't fake that, can you? She's not the biological mother, Tony said, speaking slowly and carefully like he was explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever. The DNA doesn't match. At all. Like, not even a little bit. I sat there in that plastic chair, in that too bright hospital corridor, and tried to process what I was hearing. The woman who'd given birth to Leo, or who I'd thought had given birth to Leo, because apparently nothing in my life was real, wasn't actually his biological mother? How was that even possible? Had there been a mix-up at the hospital? Some kind of insane baby swap situation that only happened in bad Lifetime movies? But even as my brain tried to come up with reasonable explanations, tried to find some logical way to make this make sense, my gut knew better. That moment of panic on Camille's face when I'd mentioned DNA testing, her complete lack of maternal instinct, the way her whole family had dismissed Leo's crisis like it was nothing, it all suddenly clicked into place like the world's most horrifying jigsaw puzzle. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a hospital mix-up or a medical mystery. This was deliberate, planned. Camille had somehow passed off a child that wasn't hers as her own, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too busy being a good husband and father to notice. Then whose child have I been raising? I whispered into the phone, not really expecting Tony to have an answer, because how could he possibly know? Tony was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that made me want to punch something. That's what you need to find out, man. But whatever's going on here, it's not normal. This isn't just a case of infidelity or a affair, baby. This is something else entirely. Something else entirely. Yeah, that was the understatement of the century. I'd gone from suspecting my wife might have cheated to discovering that the entire foundation of my family was built on lies I couldn't even begin to understand yet. Who was Leo's real mother? Where had he come from? Why had Camille pretended to give birth to him? And more importantly, what kind of person does something like that? I thanked Tony, though I'm not sure what I was thanking him for, exactly, since he'd just blown up my entire existence, and ended the call. Then I just sat there, staring at the wall, watching hospital staff walk past going about their normal days while mine had just exploded into a million pieces of what the actual hell. Leo was awake now, had been for about a day and a half, and was doing remarkably better. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, talking about recovery timelines and physical therapy and all the medical jargon that boiled down to your kid's probably going to be okay. Our kid. Except he wasn't ours, was he? He wasn't mine biologically, and he wasn't Camille's either. He was someone else's? No one's. Everyone's. But here's the thing that hit me as I sat there having my existential crisis in a hospital corridor. I didn't care. Or rather, I cared desperately, but not in the way you'd think. Yeah, I was furious at Camille for lying, betrayed beyond anything I'd ever felt before, and determined to find out what the hell was going on. But Leo? That kid in the ICU who was finally starting to look more like a boy than a science experiment? He was still mine. DNA or no DNA, biological connection or not. He was still the kid I'd raised, still the son I loved, still my boy. The question wasn't whether I wanted him in my life. That answer was a resounding, non-negotiable yes. The question was what kind of twisted, soap opera-level insanity had brought him into my life in the first place, and what I was going to do about the woman who'd orchestrated the whole thing. I pulled out my phone again and opened up my Notes app, because if there's one thing you learn from watching too many true crime documentaries, it's that you need to document everything. I started typing out everything I knew, every suspicion, every weird moment from the past 7 years that suddenly made sense in this horrifying new context. And then I added one more line at the bottom. Find out where Leo really came from. Because Tony was right. This was something else entirely. And I was going to figure out exactly what that something was, even if it meant tearing apart my entire life to do it. Camille wanted to play games? Fine. but she'd just made the critical mistake of playing them with someone who actually gave a damn about the truth. Game on. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling or parenting books. How to investigate your own wife like she's a criminal mastermind. There's no WikiHow article titled 10 Easy Steps to Uncover Your Spouse's Elaborate Baby Swapping Scheme, or YouTube tutorials on how to detective your way through family fraud. Trust me, I looked. So I did what any reasonably desperate man with trust issues and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I started digging through everything like I was preparing for the world's most depressing doctoral thesis. The first thing that kept nagging at me was Camille's sister, Trisha. Remember her? The one who ran the orphanage and sent me that absolutely tone-deaf text about kids getting hurt all the time? Yeah, that Trisha. Because here's the thing about Trisha's orphanage. It had always felt a little too convenient, a little too perfectly positioned in the family narrative. Camille was always volunteering there, always talking about charity work and helping children, always making herself look like Mother Teresa's cooler younger sister on social media. And I'd thought it was sweet, thought it showed she had a good heart beneath that designer clothes exterior. Turns out I was an idiot. A trusting, naive idiot who probably should have watched more true crime documentaries and fewer romantic comedies. I started with the basics. Timeline. When was Leo born? 7 years ago, obviously. What else happened around that time? Well, Camille had been pregnant, or so I'd thought. I'd seen the belly grow, been to some of the doctor's appointments, though now that I thought about it, she'd gone to most of them alone, claiming I'd be bored, been there for the birth, though I'd been in the waiting room for most of it because complications. I'd held what I thought was my newborn son, counted his tiny fingers and toes, and fallen completely in love with this wrinkly little potato of a human. But if Leo wasn't Camille's biological child, then whose was he? And more importantly, where had he actually come from? I called Tony back because I needed more information, needed to understand what the DNA could tell me beyond the devastating news that my entire family structure was a lie wrapped in deception and tied with a bow of betrayal. Can you tell me anything else from the results? I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I felt like I was slowly losing my mind. Like, where Leo might have come from. Any genetic markers, or whatever. Tony sighed, and I could hear him typing in the background. I can tell you he's Caucasian, which you obviously already knew. No rare genetic markers, no hereditary diseases that would narrow down his family tree. He's just a healthy kid with no biological connection to either of you. I'm sorry, man. I wish I could give you more. So Leo was a ghost baby. A child with no origin story, no biological connection to the family he'd been living with, just suddenly appearing in my life fully formed like Athena springing from Zeus's head, except way more suspicious and with significantly more legal implications. That's when I remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt like a neon sign pointing directly at the truth. About a week after Leo was born, or after he'd supposedly been born, Camille had gone back to the hospital. Complications from delivery, she'd said. Need to get checked out. Make sure everything's healing properly. She'd been gone for most of the day, and when I'd offered to come with her, she'd gotten weirdly defensive about it. I'm fine, she'd snapped. Stop hovering. Go take care of the baby. The baby. Not our baby or Leo. Just the baby. Like he was a generic infant unit rather than our son. And then there was the orphanage connection. Trisha had come over constantly those first few weeks, always volunteering to help, always bringing supplies, always very involved in Leo's care. At the time, I thought she was just being a good aunt. Now it seemed like she was making sure the product was satisfactory, like she was checking on inventory she'd personally delivered. I needed to see records, needed proof, needed something more concrete than my growing suspicion that my wife and her sister had pulled off some kind of baby heist. So I did something that was probably illegal but felt absolutely necessary. I broke into Trisha's orphanage. Well, broke in is a strong term. I had a key from years ago when I'd helped with some repairs, and I'd never bothered to return it because I'm bad at remembering that kind of thing. So really, I just let myself in. After hours. Without permission. While wearing dark clothes and feeling like the world's least competent burglar. The orphanage was one of those old buildings that creaked and groaned like it was haunted by the ghosts of administrative paperwork past. I felt my way through the dark hallways using my phone's flashlight, heading toward Trisha's office because if there were any incriminating records, that's where they'd be. The door was locked, but the lock was one of those cheap ones you could probably pick with a bobby pin and a strong sense of determination. I used my library card. Yes, really. Apparently, library cards are good for more than just borrowing books and making you feel like an intellectual. Trisha's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who ran an orphanage while also being complicit in what I was increasingly sure was some kind of baby smuggling operation. Neat, organized, and full of filing cabinets that probably contained all the secrets I was looking for. I started with the most recent files, working my way backward through adoption records, intake forms, and approximately 7 million other documents that made me realize just how much paperwork is involved in caring for children. And then I found it. A file dated 7 years ago, right around the time Leo was supposedly born. It was labeled Private Adoption, Confidential, which is basically admin speak for we're doing something shady and don't want anyone to know about it. Inside was a birth certificate, not Leo's official one, but a hospital record, showing that Camille had indeed given birth 7 years ago. But here's where it got interesting. There were 2 sets of documents. One showed a baby being born to Camille Harrison, weight 7 pounds 3 ounces, perfectly healthy. The other showed a baby being transferred from the orphanage to Camille and me on the same day, same weight, same basic description. 2 babies. 1 birthday. 1 massive, elaborate, absolutely insane switch. I sat there in Trisha's office, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight, reading through documents that proved my wife had given birth to a child and then immediately swapped that child with a different baby from the orphanage. But why? Why go through 9 months of pregnancy, give birth, and then trade your biological child for a completely different kid? It made no sense. Unless I kept digging. And that's when I found the name that made everything click into place like the world's most horrifying puzzle. Derek Morrison. Camille's ex-boyfriend. The guy she'd dated before me, the one she'd claimed was just not right for her when I'd asked about past relationships. His name was on a document as the adoptive father of a child born on the exact same day as Leo, to a mother whose name was conveniently redacted but whose blood type matched Camille's. Let me break down what I was looking at, because my brain was moving at approximately the speed of molasses trying to process this information. Camille had gotten pregnant by Derek before we were even married. She'd convinced me the baby was mine, had me pay for everything, prenatal care, birthing classes, hospital bills, all of it. And then after giving birth to Derek's kid, she gave that baby to Derek so they could secretly start a family. To cover up the lie, she used her sister's orphanage to swap in a different newborn and passed him off as ours. I actually started laughing. Like, genuinely, hysterically laughing in that dark office, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate con job I'd ever heard of outside of Ocean's 11. The sound echoed off the walls, probably making me sound like a complete lunatic, but I couldn't stop. It was either laugh or scream, and laughing seemed like the more socially acceptable option even though there was no one around to judge me. So basically, I said out loud to the empty office, because apparently I'd reached the point of talking to myself. I've been funding a love triangle with diapers and college savings plans. I'm like a crowdfunding campaign, except the campaign was help Derek and Camille secretly raise their kid, while some idiot thinks he's the father. The beautiful part, and by beautiful I mean absolutely rage-inducing, was how perfect the plan had been. By getting pregnant before we were married and convincing me the kid was mine, Camille ensured I'd stick around, pay for everything, be the responsible co-parent. Then by swapping the baby, she got to give her and Derek's biological child to Derek while still maintaining her marriage to me, probably because I had better insurance and a more stable job. And Leo? Leo was just a prop in their scheme, a convenient substitute who'd probably been given up by some desperate mother who thought her kid was going to a good home. I took photos of everything with my phone, every document, every piece of evidence that proved what they'd done. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the office, and walked out of that orphanage feeling like I'd just completed a heist, except instead of stealing something, I'd stolen back the truth about my own life. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about Leo, about how none of this was his fault, about how he was just an innocent kid who'd been used as a pawn in some twisted game. And I thought about Camille, about Derek, about Trisha, about this whole family of absolute sociopaths who'd looked me in the eye for 7 years while lying about literally everything. But mostly I thought about what I was going to do next, because I had evidence now. Proof. Documentation of fraud, of baby swapping, of what was probably about 17 different crimes that I'd need to Google because I wasn't entirely sure what you called it when someone pretended their orphanage baby was their biological child while giving their actual biological child to their ex. I pulled into my driveway and sat there in the dark car, engine off, phone full of incriminating photos, and I smiled. Not a happy smile. More like the kind of smile a shark probably makes right before it bites someone. Camille wanted to play games? Wanted to treat me like an ATM and emotional support animal while she lived out her secret life with Derek? Fine. But the game was over now, and she'd just lost spectacularly. Because while she'd been busy worrying about cupcakes and family parties and maintaining her perfect image, I'd been doing actual detective work. And now I had all the receipts. Literally. If you told me a month ago that I'd be spending my nights hunched over a laptop like some discount version of a TV detective, mainlining espresso shots and developing what was probably a concerning caffeine dependency, I would have laughed in your face. But here I was, living that exact life, fueled by equal parts betrayal and extremely overpriced coffee beans that promised to keep me alert enough to unravel the soap opera that had apparently been my marriage. The thing about discovering a massive conspiracy is that once you find one thread, you start pulling, and suddenly you're drowning in an entire sweater's worth of lies. After the orphanage break-in, unauthorized evening visit, I became obsessed with finding every single piece of evidence I could. Bank records, emails, text messages, social media posts from 7 years ago, credit card statements, anything and everything that could prove what Camille and her merry band of criminals had been up to. Bank records were surprisingly easy to access since we had a joint account, because past me had been a trusting idiot who believed in financial transparency and sharing everything in a marriage. Present me wanted to go back in time and slap past me upside the head. Going through our statements was like reading a crime novel, except I was the victim and also the one paying for everything. There were monthly transfers to Trisha's orphanage, all labeled charity donation, in amounts that ranged from $500 to $1,000. Every single month. For 7 years. I did the math, because apparently I was a masochist who enjoyed quantifying exactly how much I'd been financially screwed over, and realized I'd donated approximately $70,000 to this orphanage. $70,000. That was a decent car. That was a down payment on a house. That was Leo's college fund, which I'd been separately saving for like an absolute chump, while apparently also funding whatever the hell this orphanage scam was. But wait, it got better. Because I also found transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Smaller amounts, $200 or $300 here and there. Always on the 15th of the month. Always labeled something vague like personal or miscellaneous. I ran the account number through every search engine and banking database I could find. And guess whose name popped up? Derek freaking Morrison. My wife had been sending her ex-boyfriend money. Monthly. For years. While I was working overtime to pay our mortgage and save for our kids' future. I sat back in my chair. This was around 2 in the morning, by the way, because sleep was apparently optional when you discovered your entire life was a lie, and just stared at the screen. The audacity. The absolute, unmitigated gall of this woman. She'd convinced me to work extra shifts, told me we needed to budget carefully, made me feel guilty for wanting to buy a new TV or take a vacation, all while secretly funneling our money to her ex and her sister's shady orphanage operation. Emails were next on my investigative hit list, and let me tell you, people really need to learn about digital security. Camille used the same password for everything, Madison 2016, which was her niece's name and birth year, because apparently originality was not her strong suit, and I was into her email account faster than you could say grounds for divorce. The inbox was a goldmine of incriminating evidence. There were emails between Camille and Trisha going back years, casual conversations about the arrangement and keeping things quiet, and my personal favorite, making sure he doesn't suspect anything. That was me. I was he. The clueless idiot husband who didn't suspect that his wife and sister-in-law were running what amounted to a baby laundering operation. One email chain from 7 years ago was particularly illuminating. Camille had written to Trisha, "Everything's set for next week. Derek's ready on his end. Make sure the paperwork looks legitimate. We can't have any mistakes." And Trisha had responded, "Don't worry, sis. I've done this before. He'll never know the difference." Babies all look the same anyway. Babies all look the same anyway. They discussed swapping children with the same casual tone people use to discuss swapping recipes or trading Pokemon cards. Like Leo and Camille's biological son were just interchangeable units rather than actual human beings with lives and identities and futures. There were also emails between Camille and Derek, and those were even worse. Love letters, basically. Can't wait until we can be together properly. Derek wrote in one. Our son is beautiful. He has your eyes. And Camille responded, soon, babe. Just need to maintain appearances a bit longer. The insurance and financial stability are too good to give up right now. I was the insurance and financial stability. I was the meal ticket. I was the sucker who worked his ass off while my wife played house with her ex-boyfriend using a kid they'd created together, while I raised a completely different child thinking he was mine. If this were a movie, it would be too absurd to be believable. Critics would pan it for being unrealistic. No one would fall for this. They'd say, the protagonist is too stupid to be sympathetic. And you know what? They'd be right. I had been stupid. Stupidly trusting, stupidly devoted, stupidly blind to every red flag that had been waving in my face for 7 years. I compiled everything into organized folders on my laptop. Bank records, emails, orphanage documents, DNA results. I even created a timeline document, mapping out exactly when everything happened, cross-referencing dates with photos and social media posts. If I was going to blow up my life and possibly send multiple people to prison, I was going to do it thoroughly. Call it the project manager in me. But even my revenge was going to be well organized and properly documented. The next morning, or really later that same morning since I'd pulled an all-nighter, I printed everything out. Every email, every bank statement, every piece of evidence I collected. I'm talking reams of paper, enough to kill several trees, and probably raise some questions at the office supply store about what exactly I was doing with their entire stock of printer ink. But I wanted physical copies, backups, redundant proof, because if TV had taught me anything, it's that digital evidence can be deleted or hacked or mysteriously disappear at the worst possible moment. I also made multiple digital backups, external hard drives, cloud storage, email attachments sent to myself and Tony. If my house burned down tomorrow, if my laptop got stolen, if Camille somehow figured out what I was doing and tried to destroy the evidence, I'd still have copies. Dozens of copies. I was like a paranoid librarian archiving the end of my marriage. That's when Camille decided to make an appearance at home. She'd been mostly absent since her ICU fashion show, probably staying with her parents or Derek or whoever would enable her delusions, only stopping by occasionally to pick up clothes or judge my deteriorating mental state. She waltzed in around noon, looking effortlessly put together as always, probably fresh from a spa day or brunch with her equally terrible friends. You look like hell, she said, which was rich coming from someone who'd been lying for 7 years straight. Are you sleeping? I looked up from my fortress of evidence. I'd spread it all out on the dining room table because I'd run out of desk space, and smiled at her. Not a friendly smile. More like the smile a cat gives a mouse right before the pounce. Just catching up on some reading, I said, gesturing at the papers. Fascinating stuff. Really educational. You should take a look. She glanced at the table, and I watched her face carefully. There it was again, that micro-expression of panic, that tiny moment where the mask slipped, and I could see the real Camille underneath. The one who knew exactly what she'd done and knew that I'd figured it out. What is all this? She asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice had gone up half an octave. Evidence, I said simply. Of fraud. Baby swapping. Financial crimes. You know, light reading for a Tuesday afternoon. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand dismissively like I was being ridiculous again, like I was overreacting to another non-issue. You're obsessed, she said, using that condescending tone she'd perfected over our years together. You make everything dramatic. This is why you're so exhausting to be around. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee, my 8th cup of the day, but who was counting? And smiled wider. Camille, this isn't drama. This is an investigation. The only thing missing is popcorn. Actually, no. Wait, I have popcorn. I pulled out a bag of microwave popcorn from under one of the document stacks. I've been very thorough in my preparations. She rolled her eyes, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. You'll regret this, she said, and there was an edge to her voice now. a threat barely concealed beneath her usual dismissive attitude. You're going to ruin everything over your paranoid delusions. Oh, I doubt it, I said, standing up and walking around the table toward her. I've been regretting marrying you since the second I said I do. This, I gestured at the evidence spread across our dining room. This is me finally doing something about it. She stared at me, probably trying to calculate her next move, probably wondering how much I actually knew versus how much I was bluffing. So I helped her out. I know about Derek, I said. I know about the baby swap. I know about the money. I know about all of it, Camille. Every single lie, every transfer, every email where you and Trisha coordinated your little scheme. I even know about the kid you actually gave birth to. You know, the one you gave to Derek while passing off an orphan as mine. Her face went white. Actually white, like someone had literally drained the color from her skin. You can't prove any of that, she said, but her voice was barely a whisper now. I picked up the DNA results from the table and held them up. Science says otherwise. Tony sends his regards, by the way. He was very thorough with his testing. This is illegal, she tried, grasping at straws now. You can't just investigate me. That's invasion of privacy. You're right, I agreed cheerfully. It probably is illegal. You know what else is illegal? Fraud. Baby swapping. Whatever the legal term is for convincing your husband that he's the father of your child when you're actually giving that child to your ex-boyfriend. I'm sure the police will have the proper terminology when I show them all of this. She looked at the evidence, at me, at the door, probably calculating whether she could grab all the papers and make a run for it. But there were too many pages, too many documents, and she knew it. You wouldn't, she said, but it wasn't a statement. It was a question, a desperate hope that I was still the same pushover who'd believe her excuses and let things slide. Watch me, I said, and I meant it. Here's something they don't tell you about calling the police on your own wife. It's simultaneously the most empowering and most surreal experience of your life. I sat in the parking lot of the police station for a solid 20 minutes before going in, clutching my folder of evidence like it was a lifeline, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. Because despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the years of deception, there was still this tiny, stupid part of my brain that whispered, maybe you're overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe you'll regret this. Then I remembered the Cupcake text. The way she'd looked at Leo in the ICU with mild annoyance. The $70,000 I'd unknowingly funneled into her scheme. And I walked into that police station with my head held high and my evidence folder held higher. The detective who took my case was this woman named Martinez who looked like she'd seen every variety of human garbage the world had to offer and was permanently unimpressed by all of it. She had that weathered cop look, tired eyes, coffee addiction visible from space, and an expression that said she'd heard every excuse and lie imaginable and believed exactly none of them. Let me get this straight, Detective Martinez said after I'd finished explaining the situation, which took approximately 45 minutes and required multiple clarifications because even I had to admit it sounded insane. Your wife faked a pregnancy, gave birth to another man's child, gave that child to said man, then swapped in a completely different baby from her sister's orphanage and convinced you it was yours. That's the gist of it. Yeah, I said, sliding the folder across her desk. It's all in here. DNA results, bank transfers, emails, orphanage records, the whole 9 yards. I basically did your job for you. She raised an eyebrow at that, probably didn't appreciate the commentary on police work, but opened the folder anyway. I watched her face as she went through the documents, saw her expression shift from skeptical to concerned to genuinely disturbed. She kept flipping back and forth between pages, cross-referencing dates, making notes in that cop shorthand that probably only other cops can read. This is, she paused, searching for the right word. Extensive, and also completely insane. You know that, right? This is like something from a bad TV movie. Trust me, I'm aware, I said. I've been living it. It doesn't get less insane with time. Martinez closed the folder and looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been pity, hard to tell with cop faces. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be straight with you. This is fraud, child trafficking potentially, identity theft, and probably about 6 other crimes I'll need to consult with the DA about. If even half of this checks out, your wife and her sister are looking at serious prison time. Good, I said, and I meant it. They should be. She nodded slowly. And the child? Leo, what are your intentions regarding custody? That was the question I'd been wrestling with since Tony first dropped the DNA bomb on my life. He's my son, I said firmly. Maybe not by biology, but he's mine. I want custody. Full custody, if possible. Whatever happened 7 years ago isn't his fault, and he shouldn't suffer because the adults in his life made terrible choices. Martinez's expression softened slightly, which I took as a good sign. That's admirable. The court will likely appreciate that. Now, I need to investigate this further, verify your evidence, probably get some warrants. This might take a few days. Are you somewhere safe? Is there any chance your wife might try to destroy evidence or intimidate you? I thought about Camille's face when I'd confronted her with the evidence, that mixture of panic and calculation. She knows I know, but I have backups of everything. Multiple backups. I'm thorough when it comes to documentation. I can see that, Martinez said, tapping the folder. Honestly, you did better investigative work than some of my officers. Ever consider a career change? After this is over, I'm considering becoming a hermit, I said. Living in the woods, away from people and their elaborate schemes. Maybe befriend some bears. They seem more trustworthy than humans. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Fair enough. I'll be in touch, Mr. Harrison. And for what it's worth, you did the right thing coming in. A lot of people in your situation would have just buried it, tried to pretend everything was fine. Yeah, well, I said, standing up. I've spent 7 years pretending everything was fine. I'm done with that. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life, and that's including the time I spent in the ICU watching Leo fight for survival. Martinez had told me to continue my normal routine, not to tip off Camille or Trisha that the police were investigating, to just act natural. Acting natural when you know your wife is about to be arrested for crimes that sound like they came from a soap opera script is harder than it sounds. Camille, for her part, was acting weird too. She kept trying to engage me in conversation, probably fishing to see how much I actually knew versus how much I was bluffing. She'd gotten uncharacteristically clingy, suddenly wanting to have dinner together, asking about my day, pretending to care about Leo's recovery. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so transparent and pathetic. We should talk, she said on the third evening, cornering me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, my 19th cup of the day, but I'd stopped counting after 15. About us. About our marriage. Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream, there is no us. You lying psychopath. What do you want to talk about? She did this thing where she tried to look vulnerable and apologetic, probably a tactic that had worked on me in the past when I was still under the delusion that she was a decent human being. I know things have been strained, and I know I haven't been the best wife lately, but we can work through this, right? For Leo's sake. For Leo's sake. She was actually playing that card, using the child she'd treated like an inconvenient prop as emotional leverage. The audacity was almost impressive. Absolutely, I lied smoothly. We can definitely work through this. Marriage is about communication and honesty, after all. The irony of that statement was apparently lost on her, because she smiled like I'd just agreed to forget everything I knew. I'm so glad you understand. I was worried you were going to do something rash. Rash? I said innocently. Like what? I don't know, she said, but her eyes were calculating, searching my face for clues. Like involving lawyers or police or making this bigger than it needs to be. Why would I involve the police? I asked, taking a sip of my coffee and maintaining perfect eye contact. That seems extreme for marriage problems. She relaxed slightly, apparently convinced that I was still the same pushover who'd believe her manipulation. Exactly. That's what I told Trisha. You're reasonable. We can handle this as a family. The family that had collectively gaslit me for 7 years. But sure, let's handle it together. I just nodded and smiled and let her think she'd successfully managed me, all while counting down the hours until Detective Martinez and her team showed up with warrants. The police arrived early on a Thursday morning. I'd gotten a heads-up text from Martinez. Today, 8 a.m. Be ready. So I was prepared. I'd actually been awake since 5, too wired on anxiety and anticipation to sleep, sitting in the living room with yet another cup of coffee and watching the clock tick down. Camille was still in bed when the doorbell rang. Multiple times. Insistently. The kind of ringing that said, police with warrants, open up, or we're coming in anyway. I got to the door first, opened it to find Detective Martinez and approximately 6 other officers, all looking very serious and very official. "Mr. Harrison," Martinez said formally, "we have a warrant for the arrest of Camille Harrison. Is she home?" "Bedroom," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Upstairs, first door on the left." Watching a team of police officers march up your stairs to arrest your wife is a surreal experience. I heard Camille's voice, first confused, then angry, then increasingly panicked, as they informed her of the charges. Fraud, child trafficking, identity theft, conspiracy. The list went on, each crime announced in that official police monotone that made it all sound terrifyingly real. When they brought her downstairs in handcuffs, her face was a mask of fury directed entirely at me. Her hair was messy. First time I'd seen it anything less than perfect, and she was still in her pajamas, expensive silk ones that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "You're ruining my life," she screamed as the officers walked her toward the door. "You're absolutely ruining everything. How could you do this to me?" I stood there, coffee mug in hand, and looked at her with the same mild interest you'd give a stranger having a meltdown in the grocery store. "No, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I'm not ruining your life. I'm just restoring mine. There's a difference." She tried to lunge at me, actually tried to attack me while in handcuffs with 6 police officers around, but they held her back easily. "You'll regret this. My family will make sure you regret this. You'll never see Leo again." "Ma'am, you need to calm down," one of the officers said, practically having to carry her as she continued screaming threats and profanity that would have made a sailor blush. As they loaded her into the police car, still screaming, because apparently she hadn't figured out that the time for maintaining her innocent act was long past, another squad car pulled up. This one was heading to the orphanage, Martinez informed me, to arrest Trisha. There was also a team going to Derek's house to arrest him. Derek actually named his kid Liam Derek Jr. I told Martinez as we watched Camille's police car drive away, her face visible through the window, still twisted in rage. Like, he wasn't even trying to be subtle about being the father. That's basically a signed confession right there. Martinez actually laughed at that. Yeah, criminals aren't usually known for their subtlety or intelligence. You'd be surprised how many people basically confession through their social media posts, or, apparently, their naming choices. "So what happens now?" I asked, finally starting to feel the adrenaline wear off and the exhaustion of the past weeks catch up with me. "Now we process them, gather more evidence, build our case. You'll probably need to testify eventually, and there'll be a custody hearing for Leo, though given the circumstances, I imagine the court will look favorably on your request for full custody." I nodded, taking it all in. My wife was on her way to jail. Her sister would be joining her shortly. Derek too. The whole elaborate scheme they'd built over 7 years was crumbling, and I was the one who'd demolished it with evidence and determination and way too much coffee. "Thank you," I said to Martinez, "for taking this seriously, for believing me." She shrugged. "Just doing my job. Though I'll admit, this is definitely going in my top 10 weirdest cases, and I once arrested a guy who tried to rob a bank with a banana." "A banana?" "Long story. Point is, your case is weirder." "Congratulations." I laughed. Actually, genuinely laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "Thanks, I think." As Martinez and her team wrapped up and left, I sat back down in my living room, in the house that was suddenly very quiet, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. The truth was out. The lies were exposed. The people who'd manipulated and used me were facing consequences. And Leo? Leo was still mine. That hadn't changed and never would, regardless of what DNA said or what schemes had brought him into my life. I picked up my phone and texted Tony. They arrested her. All of them. Evidence held up. His response came back immediately. "Proud of you, man. That took guts." Beer later. "Definitely." I texted back. "I've earned it." And honestly, I really had. The thing about criminal investigations is they're a lot less exciting than TV makes them look. There's no dramatic music, no convenient commercial breaks when things get tense, just a lot of waiting around for lawyers and detectives to do their thing while you sit at home Googling, "How long does fraud prosecution take?" and consuming your body weight in stress snacks. Detective Martinez called me about a week after the arrest to give me an update, which apparently meant, "Come down to the station so we can walk you through every soul-crushing detail of how you were scammed." I showed up with my emotional support coffee, a Vinny something or other with enough espresso shots to probably violate health codes, and prepared myself for whatever fresh hell was about to be revealed. So here's what we've pieced together from the confessions and evidence, Martinez said, spreading out a timeline on the table that looked like something from a true crime documentary. And I'll warn you, it's worse than you thought. Worse than my wife swapping babies and secretly funding her ex's love child. I asked. That's a pretty high bar. Yeah, well, buckle up, she said, and proceeded to lay out the full scope of Camille's deception in excruciating detail. Apparently, Camille had gotten pregnant by Derek before we were even married. Not while we were dating, before we even met. She'd been with Derek, gotten knocked up, and then when he'd freaked out about becoming a father and temporarily bolted, she'd moved on to her backup plan, me. The responsible guy with the stable job and good insurance. The sucker who'd believe her when she claimed the pregnancy was his after a few strategic dates and some very calculated timing. She actually planned the whole thing, Martinez explained, showing me text messages between Camille and Trisha from 8 years ago. Found you specifically because you fit the profile. Employed, decent guy, wouldn't ask too many questions. She literally had a checklist. I stared at the messages. There I was, reduced to bullet points. Stable job, won't suspect anything, easy to manipulate. It was like reading a Yelp review of myself as a mark. So let me get this straight, I said slowly, trying to process this new level of betrayal. She got pregnant by Derek, convinced me it was mine before we were even serious, had me pay for everything. Prenatal care, baby shower, hospital bills. And then after giving birth, she gave that baby to Derek so they could secretly start a family. Exactly, Martinez confirmed. Derek came back into the picture around month 7 of the pregnancy. They rekindled things, decided they wanted to raise their biological child together, but Camille also wanted to keep you around for the financial stability. So they hatched this plan with Trisha. The plan, as Martinez laid it out, was diabolically simple. After Camille gave birth to her and Derek's son, who they'd apparently named Liam Derek Morrison because subtlety was not their strong suit, Trisha arranged for a complication that required Camille to go back to the hospital. During that time, they swapped newborn Liam for Leo, a baby whose mother had given him up at the orphanage just days earlier. The real mother, Martinez said, showing me another document, was a 19-year-old college student who thought she was giving her baby to a loving family through a legitimate adoption agency. She has no idea her son ended up as part of an identity swap scheme. So Leo's biological mother was just some kid trying to do the right thing, and instead her baby got used as a prop in Camille's elaborate con. That somehow made it even worse. And Derek just went along with this? I asked. Oh, he was fully complicit, Martinez said, pulling up more evidence. We found emails where he and Camille discussed the plan in detail. He knew you were paying for everything. They actually joked about it. Called you the investment banker. Investment banker. Because apparently, I was financing their secret family without knowing it. The monthly payments I'd been making to the orphanage, those weren't donations. They were child support for a kid I didn't know existed. The transfers to Derek? Helping with expenses for little Liam. For 7 years, I said, more to myself than Martinez. I paid for prenatal care that wasn't for my child, raised a baby they swapped in like he was a rental car, and funded their actual kids' upbringing while thinking I was being a good husband and father. Yeah, Martinez said sympathetically. You were basically running a crowdfunding campaign called Help My Wife's Ex Raise Their Secret Love Child while being completely oblivious. I laughed, because at this point what else could I do? My life is literally a rejected reality TV script. Even Netflix would say this is too unrealistic. Martinez actually smiled at that. If it makes you feel better, all 3 of them are looking at serious prison time. Fraud, child trafficking, identity theft, conspiracy. The DA is throwing the book at them. Trisha especially, since this apparently wasn't the first time she'd facilitated questionable adoptions through the orphanage. Wait, what? Yeah, turns out Trisha's been running a side business matching babies with people willing to pay under the table. Your situation was just the most elaborate version. She's looking at federal charges. So Camille's sister wasn't just complicit. She was basically running a black market baby operation disguised as charity work. Every family dinner I'd sat through, every holiday where Trisha had played the saint helping orphans, She'd been smuggling children like they were knockoff handbags. The good news, Martinez continued, is that legally, Leo is considered abandoned property that you acquired in good faith. Combined with your demonstrated commitment to his care, especially during his hospitalization, the court will almost certainly grant you full custody. Abandoned property. My son, because he was my son, regardless of biology, was being described like a lost wallet I'd found. But I understood what she meant. Legally, I was in the clear. Emotionally, I was still processing the fact that my entire marriage had been a transaction and I'd been too trusting to notice. What about Camille's family? I asked. The ones who kept telling me I was being dramatic? They claim they knew nothing, Martinez said. And unfortunately, we can't prove otherwise. They're terrible people, but being terrible isn't illegal. Fair enough. At least Camille, Derek, and Trisha were facing consequences. That would have to be enough. As I left the police station that day, walking out into sunshine that felt too bright for the darkness of what I'd just learned, I realized something. I'd spent 7 years being someone's backup plan, their safety net, their reliable succor. But I was done with that now. Camille wanted to play games. She'd played and lost spectacularly. Derek thought he was clever. He was going to prison. Trisha believed she could run her schemes forever. Federal charges say otherwise. And me? I was going home to my son, my real son, the one who mattered regardless of DNA. And we were going to build something honest, something real, something that didn't require lies or schemes or treating people like investments. Because at the end of the day, that's what Camille never understood. You can't build a life on fraud. Eventually, the truth catches up. And when it does, it brings handcuffs. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which felt appropriate because Tuesdays are already inherently depressing, and this one was shaping up to be either the best or worst day of my life, depending on which way the judge swung. I showed up in my best suit, the one I usually reserve for job interviews and funerals, both of which involve people judging you intensely, and tried not to look like someone who'd been surviving on coffee and anxiety for the past month. Leo was back home by then, fully recovered from the accident and blissfully unaware that his entire existence was currently being debated in family court. I'd hired a lawyer, this sharp woman named Rebecca Chun, who specialized in custody cases and had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel nervous. She'd taken one look at my case file and said, "This is the wildest thing I've ever seen, and I once represented a guy whose wife tried to steal his kidney." High praise, apparently. The courtroom was one of those wood-paneled rooms that smell like old paper and broken families, with a judge who looked like she'd seen every variety of human dysfunction and had exactly zero patience for nonsense. Judge Patricia Winters, according to the nameplate, and she had the expression of someone who drank her coffee black and her justice swift. Camille's lawyer tried to argue that I had no legal right to Leo since I wasn't the biological father, which was technically true but also completely missed the point. Rebecca stood up and systematically destroyed that argument with the precision of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, laying out photos of me and Leo over the years, teaching him to ride a bike, at his school plays, in the hospital during his recovery. "Biology doesn't make a parent. Choice does. Commitment does. My client has been this child's father in every meaningful way for 7 years. He's the one who showed up, the one who stayed, the one who fought for Leo's life when his biological mother couldn't be bothered to visit him in the ICU because she had a birthday party to attend. She actually submitted the cupcake text as evidence. The judge read it, and I swear I saw her eye twitch. The prosecution also had representatives there because this wasn't just a custody case. It was part of a larger criminal investigation. They laid out the whole scheme, the baby swap, the fraud, the orphanage operation. By the time they finished, even Camille's lawyer looked like he wanted to switch sides. Then it was my turn to speak. Judge Winters looked at me over her glasses and asked the question that mattered. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that Leo is not your biological child. You've been made aware of the circumstances of his birth and placement in your home. Given all of this, what are your intentions?" I stood up, and for once in this entire nightmare, I knew exactly what to say without hesitation or doubt. "Your Honor, the police call him Orphanage Boy in their reports. Legal documents refer to him as the minor child in question. But to me, he's Leo. He's the kid who sings Taylor Swift off-key in the car. Who asks impossible questions about whether dinosaurs are technically dragons? Who calls me dad not because of genetics, but because that's who I've been to him every single day of his life? I took a breath, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I may not be his father by DNA, but I'm his father by choice. And that's the kind that lasts. That's the kind that matters. Blood doesn't make you show up at 2 a.m. when your kid has nightmares. Blood doesn't make you sit in an ICU for days praying for a miracle. Choice does. Love does. Commitment does. Judge Winters was quiet for a moment, looking at the evidence spread before her. At me, at the empty chair where Camille would have been if she wasn't currently in jail awaiting trial. Mr. Harrison, she finally said, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen biological parents who treat their children like burdens and non-biological parents who move heaven and earth for kids who aren't theirs. DNA is just information. Parenthood is action. She signed something, stamped it with the kind of authority that suggested the matter was settled. Full custody granted to Mr. Harrison, effective immediately. This child has been through enough disruption. He deserves stability, and clearly, you're the one who can provide it. I actually felt my knees go weak with relief. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder, congratulating me. While Camille's lawyer packed up his briefcase looking relieved, he didn't have to argue this disaster anymore. As I walked out of that courtroom, legal custody papers in hand, I realized something. Camille had tried to use Leo as a prop in her scheme, a convenient stand-in for the child she actually wanted to raise. But in doing so, she'd given me the greatest gift of my life, a son who chose me back, every single day, just by being himself. Biology didn't matter. The circumstances didn't matter. What mattered was that Leo was mine, officially and completely, and no one could ever take that away again. 6 months later, and I'm still not entirely convinced my life isn't some elaborate prank show where Ashton Kutcher is going to jump out from behind a curtain and yell, "You've been punked." But no camera crews have appeared, which means this is actually my real life now. Single dad, reformed trusting idiot, and proud owner of the world's most expensive education in why you should always trust your gut. Leo recovered fully from the accident, which the doctor said was somewhere between miraculous and kids are basically made of rubber. The scars faded, the nightmares stopped, and gradually the kid I knew came back. The one who could turn a trip to the grocery store into a philosophical debate about whether hot dogs are sandwiches and why dinosaurs definitely should have learned to fly better. We moved out of the old house because honestly, those walls had seen too much drama, and I couldn't look at the dining room table without remembering it covered in evidence of my wife's crimes. We found a smaller place across town, nothing fancy, but it had a backyard where Leo could play and, importantly, zero memories of Camille's perfume or her family's judgmental visits or any of the toxicity that had poisoned our old life. The trial happened in the spring. I had to testify, which was exactly as fun as it sounds, reliving every humiliating detail while lawyers asked questions designed to make me look either stupid for not noticing or crazy for caring so much. But the evidence spoke for itself, and even Camille's expensive lawyer couldn't spin baby swapping into something sympathetic. She got 8 years. Trisha got 12 because of the whole running an illegal adoption ring thing. Derek got 6, which honestly felt light, but apparently being stupid enough to name your secret love child after yourself counts as mitigating circumstances or something. Camille's family tried to fight for visitation rights with Leo, which was hilarious because these were the same people who'd called my son's near-death experience drama and told me to bring cupcakes instead of, being a parent. The judge shut that down so fast I'm pretty sure it broke some kind of legal speed record. Turns out bring cupcakes doesn't play well in family court. Leo knows some of what happened. Age-appropriate version, obviously. I told him that his mom had made some bad choices and had to go away for a while. That sometimes adults mess up in big ways, but that none of it was his fault and nothing could ever change how much I loved him. He took it surprisingly well, probably because 7-year-olds are resilient in ways that would make therapy patients everywhere jealous. "So mom's in timeout?" he asked, which was technically accurate. "A really, really long timeout," I confirmed. "Okay," he said, then went back to building a Lego spaceship. Kids got priorities, and dwelling on parental dysfunction isn't one of them. I respect that. Every once in a while, I pass a bakery and I laugh. I can't help it. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, And the fact that my entire life imploded because of a text message about cupcakes is the kind of absurd irony that you couldn't make up if you tried. That text sits screenshotted on my phone, a reminder of the exact moment I realized I'd married a sociopath with excellent taste in designer handbags and zero maternal instinct. Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow. 6 words that destroyed a marriage, exposed a conspiracy, and led to 3 arrests. Not bad for a pastry-related request. Tony still brings it up whenever we grab beers, which is more often now because apparently solving your own criminal case makes you infinitely more interesting at social gatherings. Remember when your biggest problem was whether to get chocolate or vanilla? He'll say, and we'll laugh because the alternative is crying, and I've done enough of that to last a lifetime. I started dating again recently, which feels weird and terrifying in equal measure. My first date post-divorce, I actually told the woman the whole story, figured it was better to get it out in the open rather than spring. By the way, my ex-wife is in prison for baby swapping on her during month 3. She laughed so hard she snorted wine, which I took as a good sign. We've been seeing each other for 2 months now, and she hasn't tried to swap any children yet, so I'm calling it a win. Leo likes her too, which matters more than anything else. She came over for dinner last week and spent an hour debating with him about whether Spider-Man could beat Superman in a fight. She's Team Superman. He's Team Spider-Man. I'm Team, can we please talk about literally anything else? Watching them argue about comic book characters while I made pasta, I realized something. This is what family should feel like. Easy, honest. No hidden agendas or secret bank transfers or elaborate schemes. Just people choosing to show up for each other every single day. Last week, Leo asked me why I kept him after finding out the truth. We were in the car, because apparently all our important conversations happen in vehicles while Taylor Swift plays in the background, and he just came out with it. Dad, if I'm not really yours, why didn't you give me back? My heart broke a little, then immediately pieced itself back together stronger. I pulled over because this conversation deserved my full attention, not divided focus between parenting and traffic. Leo, I said, turning to look at him in the back seat, you are really mine. Maybe not because of DNA or biology or any of that science stuff, but you're mine because I choose you. Every single day, I choose you. And you know what's cool about that? What? It means our family isn't an accident of genetics. It's not something that just happened because of biology. It's something we built together on purpose because we wanted to. That's actually way more special than just sharing DNA. He thought about that for a minute, his face scrunched up in concentration the way it does when he's processing something big. Then he smiled, that goofy, gap-toothed smile that could light up a whole hospital ward. So we're like superheroes choosing our own origin story? I laughed. Exactly like that. We're writing our own comic book, and it's way better than anything we could have inherited. Cool, he said, satisfied with that explanation. Can we get McDonald's? And just like that, the profound moment was over, replaced by the eternal question of whether we should get nuggets or a burger. That's parenthood in a nutshell. Deep philosophical discussions followed immediately by debates about fast food. As I pulled back into traffic, with Leo chattering about his day and Taylor Swift promising that we'd never go out of style, I realized something. Camille had tried to use me, manipulate me, turn me into a supporting character in her twisted story. But in doing so, she'd accidentally given me the starring role in something better. A real family built on choice, honesty, and stubborn determination to show up even when things got hard. The text that started with "Bring cupcakes" ended with 3 arrests, a DNA scandal, and me realizing that fatherhood isn't about blood, it's about choice. It's about sitting in ICU rooms and going to school plays and having car conversations about superhero origin stories. It's about being there, consistently and completely, regardless of what genetics say. I look at Leo now, singing off-key, asking impossible questions, being entirely himself, and I think about how close I came to losing this. How I almost stayed in that toxic marriage, making excuses for inexcusable behavior, convincing myself that this was just how families worked. Hey Dad, Leo says from the back seat, interrupting my thoughts. You know what? What, buddy? You're my favorite person in the whole world. And there it is. The moment that makes every sleepless night, every court appearance, every painful revelation worth it. Because this kid, this amazing, resilient, off-key singing kid, chose me right back. You're my favorite too, Leo. I say, and I mean it with every fiber of my being. He grins. Even more than coffee. I pretend to think about it. It's close, but yeah, even more than coffee. Wow, he says, genuinely impressed. That's a lot. It really is. But some things, some people, are worth more than all the coffee in the world. Worth more than biological connections, or convenient lies, or elaborate schemes. Worth everything, actually. And that's a truth no DNA test can ever dispute.